on that one. Turning to the escalating tensions in the Middle East this morning, the Wall Street Journal reporting U.S. and Turkey have reached an understanding to keep Kurdish fighters from filling any void left by defeating ISIS. This as Secretary of State John Kerry addressed concerns about the Syrian government's aggression toward U.S.-backed forces there.
We believe that Assad and the Assad regime long ago lost legitimacy, in part because of his regime's continued brutality against the Syrian people themselves. And that has been a magnet for foreign fighters, drawing them to Syria, fueling the rise of Daesh and other violent extremist groups.
Joining us now is former Navy fighter pilot and Fox News correspondent Leah Gabriel and Gillian Turner, a former member of the National Security Council. Cheryl Casoni is here on set with us as well. Gillian, to you first on this, what do you make of this understanding between the U.S. and Turkey?
Well, what both sides have committed to here is establishing really a no-go zone in northern Syria along the Turkish-Syrian border, to ensuring that once this no-go zone is established, that Syrian Kurds are not able to come in and fill the void, take control of the territory, which is one of Turkey's primary concerns. And I think what this agreement really reflects is the recognition that in spite of President Erdogan's critics, Turkey remains one of the United States' most strategically vital allies in the region.
What do you make of all of this, Leah?
Well, it's becoming very complicated here because, Turkey has been concerned all along. Part of the reason we've seen Turkey not really get engaged in Syria is because of the fact that the Kurds have been one of our strongest allies. Yes. And there's a concern in Turkey that the Kurds will gain power and that they will then establish their own Kurdistan. So this is a very sensitive topic with Turkey as we're doing all this. Meantime, what we've just learned, in the past few days is that the U.S. is basically committed that we are going to protect the moderate rebels that we're training, that we're putting on the ground, whoever they are, if they're part of the coalition. Just yesterday, the White House press secretary was saying, whoever threatens them, we will defend against them. So this is getting the waters are getting very muddy there in Syria, in this region, because we don't want to end up in a direct conflict with Syria and with the Assad regime. But at the same time, the U.S. is basically putting it out there that if they attack the rebels that we're training, then there's going to be problems, and we're going to send an airstrike. So it's getting very complicated there.
Gillian, by your reporting, do you feel like this is a move that would be effective and that would actually prevent those Kurdish fighters from moving in?
I certainly think it's got a lot of potential. A lot will depend on the execution and the details of exactly what this kind of no-go zone ends up being in practice. Theory is very different than practice with these kinds of agreements. But Leah hits on a really important point, which for the U.S. government, there's really this important prerogative of balancing the strategic interests of these two very important U.S. allies, the Kurds on one hand and the Turks on the other. The Kurds are essentially stepping up and fighting our ground war against ISIS in Iraq and Syria for us. On the other hand, we've got the Turks and their national security interests, which revolve around hedging against Assad and also, in due time, degrading and defeating ISIS. So we've got to balance both of these.
Leah, I have a question for you because, I reported for Fox Business in Syria, and at the time, the Iraqi refugees that were flooding, the Iran refugees that were flooding into Syria became part of the problem. And now what we're seeing is you don't know which group is with who. And for the U.S., I think that's very difficult. How do we know who to pick as an ally when all of the boundaries basically have been thrown out the window with regards to ISIS?
That's such a good question that you raise. And as a tactical operator, when I was in the military, when we're fighting any sort of a battle, there's the who's who in the zoo question. And that's exactly the point you're making here. Who's who in the zoo? And it's getting so complicated there. Now, the plan was to train around 3,000 moderate Syrian rebels to go in and fight ISIS in Syria, right, by the end of this year. Right now, we have 60-ish. They were attacked just last week. This is becoming a problem. Part of the reason that it's taking so long to train these is because not only do we have to have people who are volunteering, who are willing, and who are in line with what it is that we want to do there, in other words, fight ISIS, not the Assad regime, but we also have to vet them. And having been a human intelligence operator, that's something that I very much understand. The vetting process is very tricky, making sure that these people's ideologies are in line with what it is that we want to do, so that we're training them to work with us and ultimately not end up against us at some
Speaking
point.
of Leah and training and your serious background, I mean, I love to brag about Leah when she's on set. She just casually mentions her intelligence background as an operator.
Yeah,
For the
or she's a pilot.
and a fighter
'Cause I've
pilot.
flown
She
in-
always gets that credit.
Because I've flown in an F-16 and I've
You threw
pulled
up.
pulled bungees. No, I didn't just throw up. I threw up for 12 hours after the flight. So people don't understand
Leah's
what it's
like, I got that. So
to pull G's like that.
I got to get your take on this, Leah, real quick. Your take on the Navy making changes to its body fat rules and fitness assessment, raising the limits for sailors and moving away from the career-ending punishments for fitness failures. What do you make of that?
Wow. You know, this is, if you're not in the Navy, you're not somebody who is part of these fitness tests that we do twice a year, it's kind of hard to understand. But basically, I have seen people in my time in the Navy who were football players, for example, at the Naval Academy, who were phenomenal athletes, but could not pass the body fat assessment. Their necks were too big, for example. These guys would fail the fitness assessment because they would fail the measurement standards. It sounds to me like the Navy is basically changing those rules a little bit. They're trying to flex more to basically make an assessment. Is this person overall fit? Are our expectations realistic? Can this person do their job?
Keith, you have a shot now.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
in.
So isn't this more of a...
Whoa, wow, it's tough.
I have a lot of experience with this. I mean, I have the record in college for the slowest 2-mile run, and I would suggest that, you know, but isn't that the point that they have to evolve with the times? You know, body mass, muscle mass, very different than when these tests were created, and this headline should really say we're changing with the times.
You know, I think that's fair, and I think some people in the Navy would probably be critical of this. I want to know more details about what they're going to do here. Do I want to see the standards lowered? Absolutely not. I think it's important to be in good physical condition. You know, some people in the Navy, they're on ships. They're not out there doing things.
On a submarine, size is critical for somebody on a submarine.
But there are certainly jobs in the Navy where you do not need to be an athlete to do your job, and I think that there's an argument for that. But at the same time, I think it's important when you sign up to serve your country and to be in the military that you're fit and that you're able to handle whatever could go wrong. And I think that those Navy standards are there for that reason, but they're just trying to be more realistic.
Well, you did that. You signed up and you served, and we thank you for that.
Thank you.
So, Leah, thanks for joining us. And Gillian Turner, thank you for joining us from D.C. as well.